this is the railroad right of way. And if you look, you know, sometime on your phone, it's too sunny right now. I could make it show you all. Good view of exactly how far, you know, it looks like just this little spit on the other side over there is just right up next to the bank, but it goes way around and curves way around. Now, bear in mind the Tennessee River is a lot larger now than it was then, and at that point, the river bank probably would have been over closer to where you see the bridge now, and it would have been probably maybe even out closer to this end of that little land spit that comes out. Although there was a causeway, this is the railroad right-of-way that moves across, and you're going to go through some bottomland. When they raise the level of the water, it's going to flood. So that's why it's, you know, that much wider now. So this is the railroad bridge here at Danville. This was Danville during the Civil War, and really this is the important place that we're talking about. Fort Henry is not necessarily important except as a defense. Fort Donelson for the defense of Nashville. Fort Donelson's not necessarily important. Nashville's important. Here, Danville is important, and there was all because of this railroad, of course. Now, the railroad runs from Memphis northeastward. It's called the Memphis and Ohio down in Tennessee. It's kind of like the Mississippi Central and the New Orleans, Jackson, and Great Northern that changes name. Same railroad, but it changes name in Canton. It changes, I believe, maybe Humboldt. Anybody knows familiar with railroads or so on? But it becomes, I believe, the Memphis, Clarksville, and Louisville Railroad or something like that. If y'all are familiar, anyway, railroad names, we won't get bogged down on that. But this is the key to the Confederate defense here, and mainly this bridge here. Now, this bridge is one of those. It's not a drawbridge. Most time when you hear descriptions of it, sometimes they talk about a drawbridge, but it's one of those that sets. And I haven't done enough research. I'm sure it's not, but there's a pillar out in the middle of the river, and it's a swindle bridge. You know that swings when river traffic comes. It swings parallel to the river so the boats can go by, and when the train comes, it swings back and lets the train go by. So again, this is the important spot. Now, why is it so important? You look at the grand concept of what's going on in terms of the Confederate defense here. And if we could get out in the river, if this guy would let us jump on his boat, we won't do that. But you can probably see all the way up past Big Sandy and all the way to Fort Henry. It's not that many miles up there. You'll see exactly how many as we go back. The road's a lot better going back than it was coming down this way. We came at an angle, and we'll go straight back up this time. So Fort Henry, I would say, is probably 10, 12, 15, maybe 15 miles north of us at this point, and that is the defense for this railroad bridge. Now, Johnston, of course, as you all know, and we start a little farther ahead because of this group. You all know the history. Has basically his line of defense running from Columbus, Kentucky, through the Twin River forts here, and then over to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then to the Cumberland Gap area, and so on. And of course, across the Mississippi River, all the way to Indian Territory. Basically, he's tasked with that, but he doesn't give a whole lot of attention to that. He basically lets Sterling Price first, and then, you know, there's that squabble between Sterling Price and McCullough and some of those, and they send out Van Dorn, like that's going to solve anything. You know, they send Van Dorn to take care of that, and Johnston kind of says, all right, I've got enough on my hands, y'all fool with that out there. Johnston's interesting character. In fact, I'm right in the middle, really past the middle, working on a new biography of Johnston. It's not really a biography. We've got Professor Rowland's biography, which we don't really need another major biography, but this is more of a think piece study of his Confederate command, you know, Civil War in the West type stuff.
That's a really good project.
And well, it's been really fascinating, and looking at what he was facing and so on. And when we get, what is it, next week? 2 weeks, when we get to Murray, Dave and I are part of this Civil War Western Theater historians or whatever, and so I want to pick y'all's brains a little bit in my session. You're leading the first session, aren't you? I'm doing the second session. So There's the ferry. We could go across the ferry if y'all wanted to. I want to pick some brains. Was Albert Sidney Johnston really as bad as some say he was? Is Albert Sidney Johnston really as bad as Larry Daniels says he was? I want to pick Larry's brain. Tell me why he's so bad. And I know the conclusions that I've come to. I've been through all the official records and all that kind of stuff, and I'm coming to some conclusions. I don't think he was, I'm not spilling beans or anything, I don't think he was as good as Professor Rowland says. I don't think he was as bad as Larry Daniels says, but, we'll just have to see. But he's got this whole defensive line to hold, and the problem, do I?
I was just going to say, let's be honest, it's really an impossible tactical situation.
Well, I've always said Jefferson Davis is his big buddy.
Yeah.
And he does him no favors by giving him command of the Department of the West.
Here, defend this entire line.
And there are no troops to do it with, hardly. And even worse than that, one of the big things that's come out of going through all of the official records and all that, it's not maybe so much the lack of troops, it's the lack of arms. I mean, there are whole brigades that are in camp, trained and ready to go, that are drilling with sticks, and so on, that there are no arms for them. So how does Johnston defend this? Well, part of the whole thing, my argument on Johnston, is that he is a gambler, that he's gambled his whole life, deals in Texas and even going to Texas and just tons and tons of things. And for most of the fall and the winter that Johnston has this line, he's basically bluffing. He's saying, all right, I'm gonna go get y'all, and like a poker player would bluff and his hand and so on, hoping that would scare the Federals enough that they won't come messing with me, until really he's hoping for the winter to come about, which it's a very mild winter in December. And he's just waiting for the rains and all that to come in late December, January, and hopefully February and March and all that. But Grant doesn't cooperate, obviously, with that. So how does he defend with so little troops, so little arms, hoping to reach winter? Well, he does it by having pockets or garrisons at the major transportation routes. The Mississippi River at Columbus, the Twin Rivers here on these forts on the Twin Rivers, the railroad between Nashville and Louisville at Bowling Green, and then the Cumberland Gap, of course, those roads and so on over there. Where any one of those is threatened, of course, you want to shift troops there. You got to be mobile enough to shift troops. How does Johnston quickly shift troops? He does it by this railroad. He has interior lines of communication. Y'all are familiar with that concept rather than exterior lines. I just mentioned the Chickasaw Bio book, and that is a wonderful, wonderful example of exterior lines and interior lines. When the Confederate Army is arrayed on the Tallahatchie line in December of 1862, and Sherman is at College Hill and Oxford, or actually the Confederates on the Yallabusha line, and Sherman and Grant are at Oxford and College Hill. Sherman leaves to go back to Memphis and go back down to Vicksburg, and it takes him about 3 or 4 weeks to do that. It takes the Confederates about 3 or 4 days because of their interior. Sherman's operating on exterior lines, Confederates are operating on interior lines, and they're able to move so much quicker than Grant. And I read something the other day, I'm not sure where it was, but interior lines and exterior lines it doesn't always have to do with distances. It has to do with transportation.
Yeah, it's
speed. You can move a longer distance faster, even if it's longer than what your opponent is. So Johnston is using this as interior lines of communication, that if he needs to shift troops, say from Columbus to Bowling Green, which he does, Hardee's troops first of all that come out of northern Arkansas, and then Johnston himself. Johnston is originally at Columbus, and then Hardee wires him and says, you need to be here now, they're coming, and so Johnston moves by railroad up to Bowling Green. So the railroad is extremely important. And so if you start looking at the federal opportunities here and the federal ideals and what they're going to do, Grant and C.F. Smith and some of these are talking about Fort Henry and so on. Yeah, we got to get Fort Henry. Obviously, that's the gate. If you're going to go into any of these houses or campers or whatever, you got to go through the door. So that's the first thing. But going through the door is not what you're looking for. You're looking for the Dr. Pepper in the refrigerator or whatever you're looking for, you know. But you got to go in through the door. Well, Fort Henry and Fort Heiman are the door, which we'll see, or the doors, which we'll see in just a minute.
Probably worth mentioning.
Or a little bit later.
The next lateral line of communication, south of here, you have to go all the way down into northern Alabama. To Corinth,
Mississippi, and the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, exactly. So you're looking at tiers of communication and logistics, and that's what's so important. And even, you know, looking at the Confederate High Command, they're in Bowling Green, Kentucky, but they're already starting to think about our next line will be in northern Alabama along the Memphis Charleston, and they're even starting to talk about the next line then all the way down to Jackson, Mississippi, along the Mississippi, the Southern Railroad of Mississippi. So they're thinking tiers of defense and lines of defense. And of course, that's exactly what happens. The Federals start moving from the south as well, and of course those lines of defense are going to meet each other, and by 1863 you've got just one, and that's basically Vicksburg and the Southern Railroad of Mississippi. So lines of communication, interior lines here, extremely important, and the Federals know this. And so, yeah, they're talking about Fort Henry. Let's take Fort Henry, but what's the real goal? Admiral Foote, flag officer at that point, Foote, has already made plans that, hey, once we get past Fort Henry, and actually when you get to Fort Donelson as well, they're not thinking initially we're going to capture Fort Donelson and all that. All we got to do is do what to Fort Donelson? Get past it, and then our gunboats can outflank the Confederates on land, go all the way to Nashville, whatever. So even if we don't take Fort Henry, get past Fort Henry, and then what they will find is the Confederacy, and you see this over and over and over, is basically an eggshell. There is nothing left besides this initial defense at Fort Henry, and it ain't much of a defense, as we'll see just a little bit later. So plans are already being made. Halleck tells Flag Officer Foote, and Flag Officer Foote tells his commanders, Ledyard Phelps, that I want you to head on down the river and get that bridge at Danville. That is the key point, because if that is taken, if that is destroyed, and they don't destroy the whole thing, as I understand it, they mess up the mechanism so that it can't rotate, so that trains can't go over. Boats can, but they can't rotate it. And then I think there are a couple of trusses like leading up to it, like trestles leading up to the main bridge, and then maybe they take out a couple of those that can be, you know, comparatively easily repaired if we need the railroad a little bit later on. But anyway, the main point is to stop rail traffic back and forth. And so what that is going to do, and that actually happens when Fort Henry falls on the 6th, Flag Officer Foote sends Ledyard Phelps right on up the river, southward, up the river. The river flows north at this point, with those 3 timberclads, the Lexington, Tyler, and the Conestoga. And they will reach here by, I forget the exact date, I believe it's late on the 7th that they reach this point, and they will tinker with the bridge and basically take possession of the bridge. Now, what effect does that have on Johnston? What does it do in the big picture to Johnston? Well, Johnston's line is severed. It is broken slam in two, because now you have this big old river, not quite as big as it is now, but in those days, just as formidable river, separating your flank that encompasses, you know, the Bowling Green garrison, Zollicoffer, well, Zollicoffer's dead, but Crittenden at Mill Springs and falling back to Murfreesboro and all that, separates all that from Beauregard and Polk in Columbus. So now you have this river separating, and there's no way to communicate back and forth. You can't get across this thing, especially with Union gunboats going up and down and patrolling. Now, the next place, again, back to your point, to get the two sides together is where? Where's the next crossing point northward or up the river, southward along the river? Where's the next bridge?
You want me to answer? Eastport.
Do you know it? There's not a bridge at Eastport.
No, but down, that's
Florence, Alabama. Okay. Florence, Alabama, close to Eastport, right in the bend there. Florence, Alabama is the next bridge across this thing that you're going to be able to bring the wings together. And so as Johnston, as Fort Henry falls, and we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because we're not to Fort Henry yet, but we're giving the bigger picture. When Fort Henry falls, Johnston immediately, Beauregard is in Bowling Green with it, Covington House, and they have this conference on February the 7th. This is one of the, somebody asked me about the aha moments of Vicksburg. What did I find? So, and this was one of the aha moments of writing the Fort Henry and Fort Donelson book, that on February the 7th, Johnston and Beauregard and Hardee and all of these realized the game is up. Fort Henry is the big blow that is going to cause us some major problems. And so even on February the 7th, they decide we have got to withdraw from Bowling Green, and we've got to get south of the Cumberland River, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. That's being held by Fort Donelson, because if those gunboats get past Fort Donelson, then Nashville will fall. And where's the next crossing point past Nashville? You know, who knows? We got to go way up to, you know, Mill Springs or something. So if we're going to get that wing of the Army south of the Cumberland River, Fort Donelson's got to hold long enough to then get them past the Tennessee River to link up with Beauregard. Beauregard doesn't have quite as hard a time getting southward because he doesn't have these two rivers that he's got to cross. But they're already starting to think about both wings falling back and this concentration point at this new line, you know, basically what will culminate in Corinth. Now, there's more to it as well. When we think about Shiloh and the concentration that happens at Corinth, when you start thinking about Bragg coming up from Florida with what would effectively become his corps at Shiloh, comes up from Pennsylvania or Pensacola and Mobile and so on. When Daniel Ruggles brings basically what will be his division of Bragg's corps up from New Orleans and moves them northward. All of that is ordered on February 8th, February 9th, February the 10th, after Fort Henry fell. When does Fort Donelson fall? The 16th. So all of this is a result of Fort Henry and the opening of this river past this bridge, and Phelps goes all the way down into Florence. He goes all the way to Florence, and the telegraph operator, the Yankees take over the telegraph and send some wondrous message, they said, to Richmond, you know, and all of that. So all of this concentration that will result in Shiloh occurs as a result of Fort Henry, not Fort Donelson, because Fort Donelson hasn't even fallen yet. Fort Donelson's holding Nashville. Fort Henry is the breakaway point for not only this bridge, forcing both wings to fall back, but also the Federals moving all the way into northern Mississippi and northern Alabama. So I think it's important. It's a long way down here, as you saw, but I think it's important to come here and to see probably the strategic point of all of the campaign here. Not necessarily Fort Henry or Fort Donelson. This is the key point, and this is what is so important. And the fall of this bridge is what breaks the whole Confederate line and forces Johnston Beauregard to fall back. Any questions here?
Was there any combat at this, or did they just take it?
There are very small Confederate forces here that kind of just scamper off in the night when the Federals reach here. There's just very little, I wouldn't even call it skirmishing, probably just some contact maybe that occurs in the naval forces, you know, reach land and do what they're going to do and all that kind of stuff. So no, it's not any major fighting here, but it is important. Not all the heaviest fighting is not all the important stuff comes with heavy fighting, because there are campaigns I understand that are not to be discounted because they're not written in letters of blood. I think it's some book that just came out recently or something. You know anything about that?
Tullahoma.
Yeah, that's the book. There's a couple of Yankees that wrote that
point
book.
about Johnston being a bluffer, that makes a lot of sense to me, but it seems to me his whole card is this, and he's blown it because he doesn't have that whole card.
Yeah.
His whole card is a deuce. He doesn't have anything.
When you look at Johnston, and this is getting into the research that I'm doing and all of that kind of stuff. When Johnston arrives in September, mid-September, he has it's what does Truman say when he assumes the presidency? It feels like the moon and stars and the sun, everything have fallen on my shoulders or something. Johnston gets out here and he realizes, on September 15th, he just left Richmond, and he gets out here and figures out, okay, I got a mess on my hands. It's almost like Maximilian showing up at Veracruz in 1863 or whatever when
I'm the emperor.
They've told him,
Good luck with that.
everybody's welcoming you, they all want you and all that, and Mexico is wonderful and all that, and he shows up and says, all right, I've been had. And I wonder if Johnston thought, I've been had here. And so he looks at the situation and he figures out, okay, we got to hold we don't have enough troops to hold everything, but we got to hold the main parts where the transportation routes are. And actually through September, October, November, Johnston puts most people say, well, Johnston didn't pay any attention to Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. He does. He puts a whole lot of attention to Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. But one of the issues that he has, by the time he moves to Bowling Green, and we get into late December and particularly early January, Buell is pushing toward Bowling Green. There are feints toward Columbus. The gunboats come down every couple of days. And if you look at his correspondence, you see a major change from, let's make sure we got everything covered, to by early January, it's they're going to attack here at Bowling Green or either Columbus. And it's Bowling Green or Columbus, Bowling Green or Columbus, Bowling Green or Columbus. And I think at that point he does lose focus on the Twin Rivers, and that's when the Federals rise up and fight him, and he kind of regains his equilibrium a little bit in mid-January when McClellan orders these reconnaissances southward from Cairo and Paducah, because they fear that troops from Columbus are going to move to Bowling Green and overpower Buell. And so McClellan from Washington says, go keep them at Columbus. And that's when we get these recons in mid-January, and that recenters Johnston on the Twin Rivers. But by that time it's too late, and you're in the dead of winter, and the river's rising, and Tillman keeps calling for more troops, more everything, but there's nothing to send him, and so Johnston is, by that time it's too late. He's caught.
Does he have any, in his correspondence, does he have any character analysis of Buell? Does he understand what an idiot Buell is?
Actually, he does, and there is some evidence that Johnston uses that in this bluff that he has. Buell apparently was a captain under Johnston out in California when Johnston was a colonel and a brevet brigadier general, and so he knows Buell, and he knows Buell thinks, oh my goodness, this is the big Johnston, this is the big guy that I worked for and all that. And so, and you get this a lot. Everybody talked about how towering Johnston was and how great Johnston was and all that. And so Johnston, I think, uses that to kind of overawe Buell into not attacking him, making Buell think, I'm going to go attack Buell. And so Buell stays on the defensive, which suits him just perfect. He's not a very offensive minded kind of guy to begin with. And so Johnston uses what he thinks Buell's opinion of him will be to kind of push and feint enough to kind of scare Buell into not doing much of anything. So a little bit of character analysis there with Buell. All right, any other questions?
It's good. Thanks for bringing us
Okay,
here.
well,
Good to see.
wanted you to see Danville, so this is it. So we can look around a little more, whatever you want to do. I'm not sure. We can go see if you can.
I saw a truck pull down.
Did a truck pull down? Maybe when somebody
Yeah.
lives here. So
Yeah,
we
could
can
be.
drive real quick. You can do that.
I'm good. The curve of the, I saw it on my phone. No, not that. I thought it was the curve of the other part of the road.
Oh yeah. Now, you see, if you come right here, you'll see a building right in the middle of the river.
Yeah.
And what that is kind of a grain elevator type thing that was on the bank of the river, so you can see that where the bank of the river would have been then.
Oh.
And of course, when they flooded it, just flooded all of it, and
Right.
part of it's still sticking up. Have to get around here to see the top of it. Doesn't just
Standing Rock Creek.
Standing Rock Creek. It doesn't have a major role in any fighting or anything. But since we're kind of down in the area coming from Danville, we wanted to jump by here real quick. and we're a little out of sequence. Fort Henry, we haven't captured Fort Henry yet, but as the Confederates retreat from Fort Henry, getting out of Dodge basically, because they know what's going to happen, the Confederate force garrison from Fort Henry under Colonel Alfred Heiman of the 10th Tennessee will lead his troops down kind of in this direction, and will make his way to Fort Henry, while Lloyd Tillman, about 80 artillerymen, will hold out at Fort Henry and will, work the cannon and all that kind of stuff. So as Heiman leaves Fort Henry, they'll kind of take this downturn a little bit and then move up toward Fort Donelson. And they will actually move along, the road kind of moves along Rock Creek, Standing Rock Creek here. And Heiman actually talks about, and this is what I was looking up on my phone as we were coming around all those curves, and I was getting queasy.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it as straight as possible.
I actually looked up Heiman's report, and let me see if I'll just read to you real quick what he writes about the 5 crossing points of Standing Rock Creek, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. More. About 9 o'clock, the gunboats commenced throwing shells at the quarters of our pickets and other buildings. That's too early. Let's go to the next page. Sometimes my volume 7 of the official records. It's a big book. They talk about crossing Standing Rock Creek like five times. The road meanders along. And actually, Jimmy Job, the longtime park historian at Fort Donelson, located, and that's what y'all were talking about, the blue gray tour, located the 5 crossings of the old original road and all that. So suffice it to say that this is the area that that Heiman and the Fort Henry garrison would utilize to make their way to Fort Henry and move past Peytona Furnace and move on into Dover and Fort Donelson. So we're not far from the main highway up there, so we'll go up there. And what we'll do next actually is go across the bridge, across the Tennessee River, and probably, if there's not a whole lot of traffic, we'll stop right up on top of the bridge, because that's the best view shed that you can get. And I'll get on the walkie-talkies and I'll tell you, there's Fort Heiman. I don't know if y'all have know what you're looking at from the bridge and so on, but where Fort Henry was, where Fort Heiman was, and so on, and then we'll go actually to those. So we're a little out of sequence here, but since we're down in the area, I wanted to bring you down here. So. All right.
There's federal accounts too here, quote unquote chasing, right, after them.
Yeah,
they
do pursue
some
about,
pursuing through waist deep and trying to charge as fast as they can.
And they capture like 6 pieces of artillery, I think, that Heiman leaves.
Yeah, there's a battery
on the way.
captured.
Yeah, Culbertson's battery, I believe, if I remember correctly. So. All righty.
Cool.
Well, we can go swimming, or we can have a baptizing, or we can... There are 2 Fort Heimans that I'm gonna Tony, edit this out 2 Fort Heimans. One is right up in the woods here. Is the later one. The one that we're going to see as we're going down to the river is the more famous one, the one that is involved in February 1862 operations. And you see them on the map there. The red is the Fort Heiman that will be involved in February 1862. The blue is the one right up here. And it says, does it say you are here? Yeah, there you are. My dad always said, how do they know where we're going to be when they put you are here? They get it right though. This one has to do more with occupation. You heard Brian this morning talking about contraband. And if you've been to Corinth and are familiar with their story about the contraband camp and all that, it's very similar here. This is a supply area set up to funnel supplies and goods on down southward up the Tennessee. Obviously, when you get into the Shiloh campaign and all that, but even later on in 1863, 1864, their gunboats still patrolling the Tennessee River, and operations still on the Tennessee River, and even like late in December of 1864, there's still movement of divisions actually, that are chasing Hood's army and all that, involved. So the Tennessee River is still very, very active, and we know about the depot at Johnstonville and all that, but this is still a major depot, and those contraband begin to flock to the Union line. So that's what this is dealing with, not February 1862 stuff. Now we can walk up in the woods. Bear in mind that this is mid-May, and we may or may not run into a slithery creature that has no arms or legs. We may or may not run into ticks and chiggers and everything else as well.
I'm here, there'll be ticks.
But oh yeah, there'll be stuff.
That's like Dave walks in front. He's the clear.
He clears them out. But we can walk up there if you don't want to. If you don't want to. But we're gonna get in the woods and all that tomorrow, obviously as well. So might as well dive in today. So did Daryl go get bug sprays?
Yeah, I think so.
What he's after. So yeah, sure wouldn't hurt to well preserved, and I think for a while they didn't know it was here. Didn't know much of anything here.
Yeah.
And then we'll see more earthworks as we go to the other as well. Okay.
We got that walkie-talkie's picking up somebody else. We've been here before. So why are we doing it again?
That's the main road.
This is the historic road.
Jim Stafford. He had a variety show. He had a variety show on TV in the mid-70s.
Yes, he did. I remember that show. Very good.
What did you call that snake you saw yesterday?
What? I'm sorry? You saw that snake yesterday. What did you call that? I think it was a black snake.
Oh, yeah. That's what I thought it was, yeah.
I mean, it was definitely dark gray black. We got full snakes. Well, could be. Yeah, I don't think they're the same thing. But they look very similar. Oh, no. What is this? Filming people struggling now? Huh. It's got a little insight to Tony Willoughby. Wants to see people fall.
Not terribly big, but
Put it on YouTube and play it really fast.
Oh, yeah. I tell you, Bumbles bounce.
going around.
Yukon Cornelius.
But you can see how well of a preserved fort this is. I mean, this is not 1930s type Vicksburg stuff really redone it, original and very well preserved, very well defined. Mine's kind of the earthworks around Corinth. You ever been down to Corinth?
Oh, yeah.
Up and seen the salient area and all that. I mean, those are just massive, huge things.
Yeah, he's coming from the other side.
In December 1862, as far as moving toward Jackson and Clinton and all of that, there is a force that's moved out. The area commander up here was a Colonel Lowe, and I don't know if that was 5th Iowa Cavalry.
Yep.
But he actually led a detachment southward to try to cut Forrest off, and doesn't do it. Nobody cuts Forrest off. except for, you know,
Nobody
Truck
puts
Road
Forrest in a corner.
got rid of him. But at any rate, that's there is Union Garrison activity here and effort here. Surely then if we'll have more visitors.
That's
Park
Park
Service.
Service.
Yeah. Alrighty, y'all
Yeah,
want
the
to
tow
look around
truck
anymore?
wouldn't do that.
Just wanted to show you the fort since we're coming right by. A good example of extant fortifications, original fortifications.
Constructed by the Confederate States Army on the heights that stood opposite Fort Henry. Fort Henry, now underwater, was constructed on the east bank of the river. Fort Heiman was a natural fortress to defend Fort Henry and to monitor traffic on the Tennessee River. On February 6, 1862, after a short battle, Forts Henry and Heiman fell. The third Confederate fort, Fort Donelson, built on the Cumberland River 12 miles east of Fort Henry, became vulnerable to attack and was captured 10 days after the fall of Forts Heiman and Henry. Consequently, Union troops gained control of the strategic Tennessee and Cumberland rivers and access to Middle Tennessee, capturing Nashville by the end of the month. Fort Heiman remained in Union hands for over a year after the Battle of Fort Henry. For a brief period in October 1864, Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest occupied the site. This audio was made possible with the assistance of 91.3 WKMS-FM and Murray State.
All right, here's I like this map actually. It's a good map. Yeah, something good out here. Remember when we went over the bridge right here and we looked up and this point of land that I mentioned right here, and then Fort Henry. You remember the kind of star-shaped island that I showed you was right here, and Fort Henry's just right there. And what I like about the map, you can see the old bed of the river, so keep that in mind. We are about, this one doesn't show you where we are, we're about right here, and we'll go see these earthworks up there just a little bit, but it gives you a good idea of how far we are from Fort Henry and from Fort Donelson and so on. So let's walk up and see the fortifications themselves.
You broke my concentration.
Of a mystery. We don't know just a whole lot about it. Of course, the Park Service is learning more about it, but this is obviously kind of the back burner to certainly Fort Donelson and the park itself, and even Fort Henry. And then this has only been recently added in the last couple of decades or so, comparatively recent. And you can see that there's not just a whole lot of improvements around here, but you can see some earthworks down here, and then back behind this house over here, which is still privately owned. Of course, we won't go around it or disturb it or anything. But what Fort Heiman actually looked like, what its dimensions were, how big it was, where it was, and all that is still a little bit, at least to me, confusing. The Park Service may have done a lot more work and internal work and so on. I don't know. But when I was doing the research for the book, there just wasn't a lot known about it. For one thing, the problem is that there are no maps of it. We have very good maps of Fort Donelson, obviously, even Fort Henry in the official records atlas. You've got plenty of good maps. But about all you get over here on Fort Heiman is just kind of a parallelogram kind of thing, which was that really what it looked like? It doesn't fit what you see as earthworks out here. So where the main fort was, where anything was, not really sure. Don't really know, and don't really know whether the main emphasis was river or land approaches.
It has, from the maps and things, it has fairly extensive landward-facing works.
Landward-facing works. There are no big cannon here. There are no Columbiads or siege guns or anything like that, and that was not its purpose when it was dreamed up and thought about in as early as actually December 1861. The whole purpose was to man this high ground, and we'll see in a little bit when we go look at the river, to man this high ground, essentially to keep the Federals from occupying this, because if they occupy this, then they can fire into Fort Henry, and Fort Henry is much farther below, and they will command from this high ground Fort Henry itself. So this is simply really an outlying work of Fort Henry to defend, basically the land side even though it's across the river.
It's a lot like Ticonderoga.
Similar, or I was even thinking Vicksburg. You know, the main reason for defenses of Vicksburg are along the river there to stop river traffic. But then you have to build essentially detached works in that whole line of fortifications, stockade redoubt, railroad redoubt, all that kind of stuff, miles away to defend those river batteries. So that's basically kind of, you know, what we're getting here, to defend Fort Henry across the river here from a land approach, and putting artillery on this high ground. They built Fort Heiman, named after Colonel Heiman, of course, as we've already talked about, the 10th Tennessee Colonel. And there's not a lot of men stationed over here. At one point, the 10th Tennessee was. And there's some, you know, piddling little other troops and so on, but certainly by, and there's a little bit of discrepancy here, either by February the 4th and certainly by February the 5th, Heiman will take his troops across the river and join them with the Fort Henry garrison, and then of course Heiman will lead them out on February the 6th itself to go to Fort Donelson, and we'll see these guys at Maney's battery later on. This will be Heiman's brigade that's manning that action that the Union forces attack on February 13th. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So not a lot of action here preceding the attack on Fort Henry, and even on February the 6th there's not much action here, and it's the great accounts of the Union forces, basically two divisions marching, no, not two divisions, Smith's command basically under C.F. Smith, several brigades, one of whom is Lew Wallace. Lew Wallace is involved here, and of course if Lew Wallace is involved in anything, he's going to write big flowering poetry basically in prose about it, and it still gets me. He talks about those hillocks at Shiloh, you know, those hillocks in Crescent Field. But anyway, Lew Wallace will describe the approach to Fort Heiman here, and Smith will just a little bit, but the basic story is that when the Federals land across from where the McClernand lands at Camp Halleck up there, which we're going to go to after we get through here and start with the Fort Henry stuff, they'll land on the other side of the river and march north or southward. It's again hard to determine, you know, with maps and so on. You can determine the road network over at Fort Henry, but you can't determine the road network here, where it was. And even some accounts talk about, you know, we just went over land, we went through creeks and all that kind of stuff. So even the route that the Federals took to get here and so on is still a little mysterious. But we do know that when they arrive, Smith and Wallace and others, they basically walk up to the fort and are surprised that they're not getting shot at. And they enter the fort and find that, you know, the Confederates have recently evacuated. They find Heiman's tent himself's tent, where Smith and Wallace, you know, share a flask of something not carbonated, I guess. But anyway, they know they've secured the high ground over here. Actually, it's an interesting story. Wallace takes Heiman's tent, big old gigantic, I think it's a Sibley tent, and actually uses it at Fort Donelson as his headquarters tent, you know. So, and in fact, what is it he's writing about is the snow's falling on February the 13th and all that, and Wallace is sitting nice and warm in his tent, and he knows Heiman just across the Confederate lines there is without his tent and shivering and all that, and he talks about how fortunate he is to have Heiman's tent here and Heiman not have it, you know, and that's what it is. Smith and Wallace drink their flask there, and I think he says we drink a toast to the good colonel or something like that.
Yeah, actually, I just read that last night.
Did you read that?
Yeah, the book's called Grant Invades Tennessee. Not sure if you're familiar with it, but
yeah, I've heard of that book.
Isn't that Dave's book? One of Dave's books?
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, Dave Powell.
Dave Powell.
Now,
You know I'm setting the stage.
Yeah.
That's all I'm
as
doing.
we go on down the road back, we're going to take a different road as we came in. We'll get a view of the river, and we'll get a view of the fortifications, some of the earthworks. And you know, if you map this stuff, I'm not sure those wayside maps had, I mean, they had zigzag lines, but I'm not sure they correspond exactly with what's here. But it's kind of hard to figure out. I mean, this makes kind of a circle here. So this seems to be the southern end of if it's Fort Heiman or outlying works, or we just don't know. Notice as we go down this road, a lot of the earthworks are on this side of the road, down this slope, on the reverse slope. So I think a lot of the opinion has been this is Fort Heiman, you know, aimed toward the river and so on, but you can't see the river from these earthworks. So these have got to be the landward side defenses rather than, you know, the river defenses. So that leads me to believe maybe that with the, and I know this happened at Shiloh, obviously, as the river is deeper and larger and higher, it probably erodes. I'm guessing a lot of the bank where the original Fort Heiman sat, the major part of Fort Heiman sat, has probably eroded and is no longer here. It's just my guess. And this happens all over the place. You know, Arkansas Post, there's nothing left of Arkansas Post of where Fort Heiman was. And it happens elsewhere as well. So that is my best guess. Of course, the Park Service may have more information now than I do, but just take a look at kind of where the, it's not an eagle, is it?
No,
It's a buzzard, yeah.
It's a big bird, but I know
it's a turkey vulture.
They're coming for y'all. I don't know.
Yeah.
Of course, there are eagles.
Drew lucky number 12.
Devil take the hindmost.
Just come
But-
back and get my carcass.
Yeah, look at the earthworks and notice where they are in relation to the river and the topography and so on. But still beautiful earthworks, as you'll see. As we
Well,
go around.
the point about Ticonderoga, when the British captured Ticonderoga in 1777, they didn't attack Ticonderoga. They just took what is Mount Washington. They took
The heights
top,
surrounding it,
surrounding it, and then they could fire directly into
Yeah,
Ticonderoga.
where a goat can go, a man
Boom.
can go, where a man can go, he can drag a gun.
And we're out of here.
Yeah,
And I go back to Vicksburg. Same thing. They were very worried about where the Vicksburg lines were laid out, whether there are higher positions
Exactly.
within artillery range of those commanding those positions. So you mentioned, what was your question?
Where's Heiman? What happens to Heiman?
What happens to
Longer
Heiman?
term?
He of course surrenders at Fort
Right.
Donelson and goes to prison. I believe most of the higher level officers go to what's in Boston Harbor, Fort Delaware,
Fort Warren.
Fort Warren, Fort Warren in Boston Harbor. I know Buckner, even some, you know, like solitary confinement.
Yeah,
type
when you
stuff
can
until-
go out to Fort Warren, and then there's a tablet on the wall that talks about the Confederate officers being held
Yeah.
there.
But he will be
It's a cool
exchanged,
place.
and when he comes back with Tillman and all the rest, they're exchanged at Vicksburg because, excuse me, I think I swallowed a bug or something. The Dix Hill cartel, there were two places to exchange prisoners. One was Vicksburg and one was Richmond, I guess.
Yeah.
You exchange them back. So these are exchanged at Vicksburg, and basically this division that was surrendered at Fort Donelson becomes one of the divisions of Pemberton's army, then defending Mississippi along the Tallahatchie line and the Yallowbush line and all that. And Tillman becomes a division commander, and Heiman actually is slated, and there are records that indicate this, that he is slated to be one of the brigade commanders in that division, but apparently he is sick at the time. The confinement and so on is just really, really bad. And I think he winds up dying in
63
November or 62,
Okay, so
or maybe early in 63.
Yeah,
or
something
So
like
he
that.
basically disappears.
Yes, he
Yeah.
doesn't
That's what I was
he
trying to
doesn't assume another
Because
command.
he disappears in my mind, and I
Yeah.
wonder if that was.
And that's a good indication of probably what happens. You know, we hear about these these guys later on, and you don't hear anything out of Heiman. So,
That's what I was asking. Thank you.
any other questions? All right, let's walk on around. We'll go down the other road.
But these happen sometimes at night.
There's no way to get rid of it.
They had one last night.
Obviously, we're not going to be. Of course, you can see this wayside. There's some other waysides along as well, but we're not get to see those. So.
just right there. They're a little flattened out, but and again, it's hard saying because they probably built this is a built drainage ditch. But it's hard saying.
Well, it varies on the depth of the river, obviously, but down there, you see how it bends back around to the river there, and so my view is the eastern face of the fort has eroded and is gone by now. Now, where Heiman's tent was, where the headquarters are, and all that, probably either on this high ground where this house is, or the other high ground where that house is. One or the other, probably, which, you know, would stand a reason, but
We'll just take a
we don't
picture
know.
and call this Heiman's headquarters.
Heiman's headquarters.
And Walls moved that all the way to Donaldson? Wow.
Yeah.
I'm impressed.
So if you have a toast, drink it to the good German. So.
First time I came here 4 years ago, I did.
C.F. Smith's contingent on the other side of the river. When Grant gets this whole idea, and there's some debate about who actually comes up with this idea of breaking the Twin Rivers, and you know, there's evidence in the official records goes all the way back to like November. I think it's Charles Whittlesey, who commands a brigade under Lew Wallace at Shiloh, talks about, hey, why don't we go up to Tennessee and the Cumberland, you know, and break the Confederate line there. And then there's that great Sherman story about Halleck, you know, the blue line, where's the place to break it? Well, the center naturally, and all that, you know. And then there's I forget her name, but there's a woman that claims that she's the brainchild of all of this, you know, and all of that. And even goes to Lincoln later in the war and says, I need to get paid for this, you know, because I came up with all of this. Blah, blah, blah. So, but the consensus is, and this is where I think Lew Wallace got it right, I think it's so obvious that everybody came to the conclusion at once. Same thing I'm dealing with Johnston and Beauregard. You know, there's a little bit of debate among historians as to who picked Corinth as the concentration of the armies, the concentration place of the armies. And the Beauregard or the Johnston folks like to use that and say that Beauregard tried to push Corinth on Johnston and all that to show Beauregard, you know, was overbearing and all that. And Johnston folks try to, you know, his son goes to great lengths to explain that he was already thinking about Corinth, even, you know, at Bowling Green and so on. But what's interesting there, if y'all ever read The Life of Albert Sidney Johnston, the whatever by William Preston Johnston, he uses a lot of evidence, but it's all 1870s,
It's all
post-war type stuff where this guy wrote a letter to him and said, "Oh yeah, I remember your daddy talking about, you know." There's no contemporary evidence.
I had to wade through a lot of that with the decisions book, trying to figure out.
At Shiloh, yeah. So, but the conclusion I've come to is that it is so obvious that Corinth is the place to do it.
There's very little actual debate about it.
What difference does it make? You know. So the consensus is that the Federals will operate along the Tennessee and the Cumberland River. Now there is some debate about which river they go to first. Grant. Well, I may get this mixed up. It's been several books ago since I've moved with Fort Donaldson and Fort Henry, but I think it was Grant wanted to go up to Cumberland first to Fort Donaldson.
Yeah,
and Foote wanted to go to Fort Henry first, maybe. But anyway, Grant goes to St. Louis to talk to Halleck about going up the Twin Rivers, you know, hitting the Confederate line here. And this is the great scene where Halleck just kind of shoos him away, and Grant comes away saying, I forget what he actually said in his memoirs, but it's the scene that played out in the Grant thing. Did y'all see the Grant thing on the History Channel? Yeah. People ask all the time, "What'd you think of it? What'd you think of it?" I thought it was great. I was in it, But, I thought the historical part and the historians and all that was good. Obviously, the dramatization part left something to be.
I'm sure you just love the
Quite a
Shiloh
few things to be desired.
surprise.
Oh yeah, that's great. And the big, huge trenches with all revetments and all that at Fort Donaldson. And all that. I mean, they really probably could have used a historical consultant or something for all of that. But you know, the reenactors just picked it to pieces. I mean, just picked it apart. You know,
They did.
and threw away all the rest of it just because of the lack of reenactor stuff and so on. But my point in all that is that, you know, for the 99.9% of America that it's aimed at, it did its job, and it was a good thing for that group that is its audience. For the 0.1% or whatever reenactors, then yeah, it wasn't intended for them. So
The real elves wouldn't do that crap.
yeah. What was I talking about? Why am I?
You were talking about the strategic obviousness.
Oh, yeah, the scene in the Grant thing where Halleck's eating this steak, you know, and Grant comes in and, you know, and Halleck's like, "Go away, you little mutant," you know, and all that stuff. And, you know, I mean, that was a little over dramatized a little bit, I think, too. But Halleck and Foote are working together here, and they get this permission. And I love Grant talking about, you know, they had to ferry down the initial troops and then go back because they didn't have enough boats. Go back to Paducah and get the second load and bring them down. And Grant is talking about once he leaves Paducah, you know, he looks back and he's just so happy that nothing can reach us now to call us back. I'm free. I can go attack, you know, and there are no strings attached to me like I've always had and so on. So Grant's making this movement. He will land McClernand's forces first, actually a little bit downriver, farther north, a place called Ittra Landing, and they get, you know, ashore there, and they figure out, okay, well, you know, we're close to Fort Henry. Y'all know how far we just drove it, how far we are, and that was even several miles on farther north. So they said we can get closer to this thing, so let's go on down, and they'll land here, of course, in what becomes known, as we're talking about in our vehicle. McClernand's going to brown nose anybody that he can, and if he can make points to anybody, you know, he's going to do it. So he names this place Camp Halleck, and that's the big dog, you know. I mean, you don't get much bigger than, let's name it Camp Lincoln kind of thing, you know. So, and we're talking about brown nosing and Ed Barr's story. He was actually talking about with McPherson, but I think it plays in with McClernand here too. But I'll never forget, we were at Shiloh, and he's talking about McPherson. And he said, if Grant turned a corner, McPherson would break his nose. It's kind of the same thing here with McClernand, you know. If he's brown nosing anybody, and when they capture Fort Henry, he names it Fort Foote, right? He tries to even get in with the Navy. So, but what strikes me here, and you can read it in the reports, and tons of letters and diaries and all that kind of stuff, talked about this slope, and what we're going to walk over the hill there and then start downhill. We won't go all the way nearly to the river. It's a long way to the river. But they talked about all the way up this slope was just campfires and the boats down in the river, you know, at night with their lights on and all that, and these campfires up the slope and so on was just very, very beautiful. But this is the area, of course, that McClernand then, on the morning of February the 6th, will leave from, starting the process of moving down to Fort Henry. And they're supposed to arrive about the same time as the Navy does. The Navy's going to delay just a little bit, but obviously the Navy can move a lot better on the river than what the Army can move in these. How many bogs did we pass, you know?
Right.
Hughes Creek and Panther Creek and all these creeks. And I wish we had a map. Has anybody got the book, the Granite Base, Tennessee?
In my hotel room.
Yeah.
We had one here. There's a map in there that, you know, has I think it's the Boyd place and I forget who other so on. But some of those roads where we took the left and came toward this direction was the junction of some of those roads and so on. But you can look at the map and see what we're talking about there. So let's walk on up. As Darryl mentioned, you can see blue. Down kind of through the trees, you know, you can tell we're on the ridge and it starts going down. There's a wide open, pretty wide area there that we're overlooking. So
At the time of the war, was there a significant floodplain from the
Now,
ridge to the river? Or?
that I do not know. I've not seen, there was nothing in the accounts or documents or anything that would indicate that it was. And this ridge, of course, goes down pretty good. And even where the river is now, continues to go down. So I would guess there's not a major floodplain, maybe like we see at Fort Henry, but
Right.
just slopes right on down to the river is what
So
I.
a fairly decent
would
landing actually, because the
No matter how high the
channel,
water is,
yeah,
exactly.
the channel will come close and
Exactly.
you don't have,
Much like Pittsburgh Landing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. That's why they landed here.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so keep in mind as we go back and start back southward and along those same roads that we were just on and so on, that's going to be basically the route of McClernand's march. Now, some places the road's a little bit off. I think this road is a little closer to the watersheds that back up, you know, and for that reason the historic road is a little farther out so that it wouldn't be, you know, affected by the backwater and so on. But keep in mind of distances, and that's one of the reasons to bring y'all up here, is to show you exact distances, you know, how far these guys had to march. And you're talking about originally, you know, they're supposed to jump off at like 10 or 11 in the morning, be there by 1 o'clock or so. There ain't no way you can do it. And this is just an example of Grant maybe not, or maybe being a little more naive than what he should be, and maybe a little more overconfident than what he should be. And I've argued over and over and over that Grant's drinking probably was not the bigger issue for Grant. Maybe his, you know, people call him a butcher and all that, you know, maybe, you know, those aren't the issues. I think the issue, even up into the Vicksburg campaign, is his overconfidence. You know, I got this thing in hand, and forget what they're going to do. You know, the whole thing about I don't care, you know, what they do outside of my sight. Or Sherman says he doesn't care what they do outside of my sight, but it scares me like everything, you know. And Grant better start paying attention to what they're doing outside of his sight, you know. And because what they do at Shiloh or Fort Donelson or Fort Henry or Belmont or wherever, it does matter. And Grant's a little overconfident, I think, and he has to learn that. And this is one of the areas that he does.
I think that's an
yeah.
excellent point, and I don't think any of the Grant biographies have really made that point.
Yeah. And you know, well, maybe overconfidence is not the right word, but then again, maybe it is.
A certain amount of complacency. Certainly.
Complacency and naivety, I think, is. I mean, and let's face it, all these guys are naive at this point. They've never done anything like this. Armies, you know, the largest armies they've ever seen were in the Mexican War, and they were just lieutenants and captains then. And those armies were what, 10,000?
Yeah.
Winfield Scott marches on Mexico City with an army of 10,000 men or less. And so, and I don't think Zachary Taylor's army ever gets much larger than that, does it? Maybe 12,000
it
so.
pushes 15,000, but that's before they take away a bunch of troops.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly,
for the Mexicans.
exactly. But not in battle, not in combat.
Correct.
I don't think he has that much at Monterey or even Buena Vista later on. But, you know, so this is totally new. Even what Grant commands here at Fort Henry is upwards of nearly 20,000. This is much larger than what Winfield Scott had, double, you know, nearly at Mexico City. So a lot to learn here, and I think the key factor here is though that Grant learns a lot as he's going along, and that's the mark of a good general, of course. All right, any questions here? Well, let's begin our march. Actually, what we're going to do, we're going to need 4 designated drivers, and the rest of us are going to march like McClernand did.
Cool.
To Fort Henry. Anybody? You what? You call driver?
Yeah, I don't
I'm going to run ahead and tell Don.
You are, okay. I'm just kidding.
And I'll show him the way.
And or been to it, and you can like stand on the parapet and then go down from the parapet. That the parapets and all that are still
I
are
meant
still
to
there.
ask you earlier if divers had ever tried.
Musslers and so on, mussel shells. So, and I told Brian, hey, you ought to, build a cofferdam around it or something so that we would have for
That
it.
would not be inexpensive at all. Would it?
But I told him, hey, look, Ed found a gunboat. That made him famous.
Yeah.
You find a fort, you'll be the next Ed Barris of the National Park Service.
He's got to start working on his impression though first.
Well, apparently they don't have internet out here, so I was
having
going to.
trouble with the last place.
Yeah, I was going to find Dave. You gonna join us? Dave is indisposed at this point.
Looking for his law.
Don't turn around and video.
Yeah.
Don't, you don't want to do that.
It's called a zipper, David.
Goodness, what was I talking about?
Cofferdam.
Cofferdam around Fort Henry.
Doing my best to flood Fort Henry.
Illinois.
You gotta edit all this. It's getting worse. Oh, I know. Let's go coffee again. I was looking on the phone for the OR map of Fort Henry. I was going to show y'all, and so on. But the basic point is there are outer works, and then there are interior works, and then there's the fort. And you can tell we're on this ridge. I don't know if y'all saw coming up the road there. I said stop on top of this little ridge here. This is a ridge that will bend around, and we'll see the other end of it as we go to a different part of this and get a better view of the river. But this will be the better view of where the fort is. So on this ridge, it's high enough not to be flooded, but in the intermediate area, you go through swamp, and then there's a little more high ground that's flooded now, but it was high ground then, and there's an intermediate set of earthworks there, and then more swamp, and then you get to the fort, which at the time of the battle was flooding, and they talked about you just sail the boat right through the sally port to get into it. These are the most outer works of Fort Henry. That's not the fort itself, but these are the Fort Henry defenses, which you can see plainly right here. And you can actually follow these all the way around to the river. There's no need in us doing that right here, but just wanted to show you the extent of some of the earthworks that are still extant out here at Fort Henry. So when people say Fort Henry's totally underwater and all that, well, the fort proper is, but there are still Fort Henry fortifications out here to be seen. So, never any fighting here, of course. By the time that Heiman removes the 4th Mississippi and the 10th Tennessee, I think are the two major regiments that he can depend on. He will remove them from these outer earthworks and take off where we saw earlier this morning down the creek there. By the time McClernand's van gets here, isn't it Lawler, I believe, Michael Lawler in 18th Illinois is the first ones to get here. These are vacated and there's no fighting. All right, so let's head on down. Unless there's any.
Been a battery?
Do I? That looks like an embrasure, a little attached battery. I don't know. I'm not a big earthworks guy. I don't know just a whole lot about them, but it certainly looks
Like it could be, right?
yes, definitely. And but I also think after 150 years, a lot of things change. Even at a place like Shiloh, and certainly a place like this that wasn't protected for all those years until the land between the lakes and so on. So, who knows? But that definitely looks battery-ish, or not battery, but one artillery piece. It's attached a little piece. But you can see very vividly here, and
Have
you can see
walked down
embrasures.
here?
Huh?
Have you walked all the way down?
I've walked a lot of the way, but there's an easier access
Are
point
there
to
any
the.
more of these?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay.
I don't recall off the top of my head. But we can walk as far as you want today. We'll go see if you want to.
I mean, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I'm open to walking. I don't know what you guys think. And if you don't, it's fine.
It's 4:34. Just for your timing calculation.
Go hit the other.
Yeah, we're going to go hit the other.
that's a
water
big one.
will
I'm
mess
sorry.
you up. I
Yeah.
mean, distances on water. So, and I give you an example. We got in this big discussion the staff at Shallow did, and I mean it was high level, intricate, major discussion about whether you could hit a golf ball across the Tennessee River at Pittsburgh. And we discussed that forever. And one of the, I don't know if y'all know, well, I won't go into that either. Don't name names, Tim. But anyway, one of them just declared, yes, I can hit a golf ball across the Tennessee River. And, you know, it's not that wide. And so I thought, well, I'm going to check it out sometime. So one day after work, I got my driver down and went down there with several golf balls. And right below the cemetery is a ledge. I don't know if y'all been back there or not, but there's a road back there. So I teed up, and I think I took like 5 or 6 golf balls. And first 4 or 5, I dribbled, you know, just barely hit, and you know, and all that kind of stuff.
Get up there.
Yeah, the last golf ball, I mean, I drew back and I hit it perfect. And I mean, it took off and it just kept rising. I thought, this may go across the river. And it just kept rising. And it started falling, and it fell probably about a third of the way across the river there, you know. Which, I mean, Tiger Woods couldn't shoot a golf ball out of a cannon across the river probably. But it will mess you up a little bit. So where the southeast corner would have been, I really can't tell, but you know, there could be potentially some, I guess if Brian and the Park Service worked with the TVA and the Bureau of Land Management, whoever's got authority out here, I guess it would be TVA out there, to maybe put buoys on the different corners of the fort or something, that at least might help some, if they're really interested in interpretation out here. It would be helpful for folks like us to say, okay, you can see kind of the outline, but then you get into all kind, that would affect boaters, you know, and probably fishermen, skiers. You know, you don't want to run up on any more buoys than you have to if you're skiing or something like that. So, you know, I don't know, but right out there, that is the site of Fort Henry. And this is probably about the closest we can get. When we get up, we're going to go to one other spot over there and get a little better view up the river, of the view that maybe the best view we can get of that the fort would have had up the channel there. But this is probably the best that we can get, you know, close wise to the fort.
Is the next step up where the placard is, whatever, that has the painting and all that on it?
Yeah.
Yep.
80 acres is pretty substantial.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had our farm fields on the farm at 40 acres each, about.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good sized farm field. So if 80, I mean, that southeast corner really could be pretty close to us, depending on.
And
What's a quarter section? 160 acres.
I may just be throwing that 80 acres out of my
Yeah,
mind.
I
I can't remember off the top of my head.
How deep is the water out there?
It's hard to tell. The water's high right now. I've seen this low all the way out to kind of, you know, this little cove here kind of dry. So it depends on the level of the water. Probably now this way up, I would guess it'd be 15, 20 feet above the fort now. Probably channel 30, 40 feet. I would guess.
On the water they had upstream earlier in the month or last month,
yeah.
is now moving
Yeah.
in.
And of course that happened on the night of the 5th. There were major rains, major storm system came through here, and that's what caused McClernand and C.F. Smith on the other side of the river so much problems trying to negotiate the roads and so on. And a lot of log jam, backlogs, and debris in the river flowing down against the gunboats and so on. And of course they're coming against the current, that heavy current coming southward as well.
I've now seen some photos where they were taken from the air and you can actually see the outline of the fort under the water.
Star shaped, or well, under the water.
Under the water?
I thought so. I could have sworn I'd seen
I haven't
photos
seen any
of
under the
it.
water. There's a 1937 photo,
Maybe that's-
aerial
yeah.
photo that shows the star outline of the fort next to the channel of the river.
I got it. Maybe I'm thinking. No,
I have looked on Google, you know, to,
Yeah,
to
I can't
see
see
if
it.
you can see anything.
Yeah,
but
it's too muddy.
What's Fort Heiman?
Fort Heiman, that highest ground right there. Up across. You see the water tank. See the dip. See the big right there. That's Fort Heiman. Do you see? I mentioned the little triangular shape of land. See
Oh, yeah, there
the
it
little island out there.
Right.
Just beyond that, as I said, is Fort Henry. All right. let's head back. We will drive around to the other end of the Confederate fortifications and see a little better view of the river, and we'll detail the naval action there.
So Scott, they have that little earthwork marked on this map for the trenches. Yeah. Like
Where
that.
were we?
Right here.
Okay.
That's where we parked, and you can see by itself there's that little piece.
Yeah, right?
Yep, right there. But it's the only one they've got so designated that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is straight ahead. I think it's straight
Yeah,
ahead.
it's
Where
straight.
we want to go.
I'm like, you start going down that way. I'm like, no, that's.
You can't try to avoid everything.
Straight off. Nobody ever write anything else. I got dibs on it. That's like the conquistadors. I claim everything touching this land for. They have lived this to a look from the last time I was here. It looks a little different than. I have to turn around just a little bit, but you can see the earthworks here. The outer earthworks on both sides there.
This is essentially the second or third line.
This is the most outer.
Is this the same line that we parked?
Same line.
We would have walked up this way? Okay.
River that Fort Henry's at. You look out, that boat was moved, or maybe we moved in relation to it. That buoy right out there is the fort, not the one straight out here, the one farther back. So, in fact, if you look, you're fine. Yeah, see, we're a little farther up from the fort, so the fort is a little farther back.
Right. Yep. The one like straight that way.
Yeah, that's right in the sun.
Yeah.
The reflection.
Pretty neat.
All right. This will be the route that the ironclads, the 4 ironclads and the 3 timberclads behind them, will come down about 11 noonish or so under Flag Officer Foote. They will engage the fort and continue to move forward, pounding it as they knock out guns in Fort Henry. It starts with 17 guns, and they get down to 4 that are still serviceable by the time it's all over, and by the time Tillman surrenders. Now it's right out in here, it's much wider obviously than it was then. There was an island that is now submerged, but you see a little bit of the islands out there. Do you see what I'm talking about? That is called Panther Island, or the island then. This creek right here is Panther Creek that we crossed, where the Boyd residence and Myers, I forget exactly the houses back in there. But there was an island, so you could go around the main channel on this side, what they call the chute on the other side. So the ironclads come down, engage the fort. It's right out there, of course, that the Essex is hit in the boiler, and Dirty Bill Porter is scalded, and several of his crew and so on, and the Essex is put out of action, and it just floats. The river flows northward, of course, and it floats harmlessly back. The other 3, the Cincinnati, the Carondelet, and the St. Louis, are not damaged. They're hit, but they're not terribly damaged. And of course, they drive in enough that Tillman ultimately will surrender the fort. So it's really a naval victory. The Army has nothing much to do with it at all. And in fact, Tillman will surrender to the Navy, and will surrender to them and make this a naval show. This is historic. This is February the 6th, of course. The battle between the ironclads is when?
The 9th of March.
March. A month later. Now, these aren't ironclads dueling, but this is the first time in American history that ironclads will go into action. This is the first major action of ironclads against fixed field fortifications or land fortifications. But it's the first time that ironclads are in use. Of course, the Essex is not one of the city class. That you all know that's different. There are two ironclads this early that were converted: the Essex and the Benton. And the Benton is not here now. The rest, of course, the Essex will go back and be out of service for a while. Trying to think, the Cincinnati, the Carondelet winds up at Fort Donelson and St. Louis, and they're joined by Pittsburgh and Louisville at Fort Donelson, and we'll talk about them. Tomorrow. One of the cool things that I found, somebody was asking me about aha moments and so on. Just like Johnston's having trouble getting arms for his men, and to a certain degree men, the major problem that the naval forces are having is getting crews for the gunboats, and they just can't get enough. And in fact, Grant is sending, the bad seeds from the Army to the Navy, and they're trying to recruit anybody else they can. So finally, all 7 boats are basically ready, but they don't have crews enough to sustain them all or to work them all. And so each boat might have like 30, 40 crew members, which is not enough. What's the complement? 72, I believe, or
even around 100, I think.
Is it up around
I think when it's
100?
full, I think the Cairo had something like 112 when she
really?
did
Okay.
the
125 sticks in mind as far as full complement-ish.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the point is that they had to cannibalize crews from the different boats.
Yeah.
And you would transfer men off of the, for instance, Pittsburgh and the Louisville to come fight at Fort Henry here. And then when you switch boats, you would cannibalize those crews over to another boat and so on. And I found I looked for the logs, the ship's logs in the National Archives, and not a lot of them have the ship's logs. Some of them are later in the war and so on, but not from here. But what they do have is like the quartermaster records where they keep the personnel records and so on. And in those books, it would talk about, they would list the crew and so transferred to Pittsburgh February 10th, transferred to Louisville, February 9th, and so on. So finding that kind of stuff is just cool to me, which is very interesting. But when Foote wins the victory here at Fort Henry, of course, this opens up the bigger picture that we talked about earlier today, and Foote sends very quickly Phelps on upriver with the 3 timberclads that kind of hung back behind, because they don't want to get them shot up. They know what these guns, 32 pounders and so on, will do, and the rifle guns and so on will do to the timberclads. But without any more opposition, Phelps leads those 3 timberclads, Tyler, Lexington, and Conestoga, to Danville, to the bridge, and that's the keystroke there. But then he will continue on across the 7th and 8th and 9th, down into Hardin County, where Shiloh is, of course. They'll pass Pittsburgh Landings, no mention made of it at that point. The biggest prize, of course, at that point is at Saragorda in Hardin County, where they captured the Eastport, which Leonidas Polk had started outfitting and armoring and so on. And they capture it, leave one of the gunboats, I believe the Tyler, I'd have to check on it, to guard it with the crew and so on. And then the rest, Phelps goes on down to Florence and scares the ever-living daylights out of the Confederates. They're talking in papers in Virginia, Yankees in Florence, Alabama, Yankees in Alabama. And it gets Jefferson Davis's attention, and it certainly gets Albert Sidney Johnston's attention, because he can't cross this river anywhere else except where? Florence, Alabama. And if the Union Navy is already at Florence, Alabama, and I'm still in Bowling Green,
World of hurt.
we got a problem here. And so what are we gonna do? And of course, they don't have the force to sustain themselves at Florence at this point, and very quickly they turn and come back up and pick up the east port and get back through and rejoin the foot forces here, the foot flotilla. And actually the Tyler and Lexington, I believe, I'd have to check on this as well, but 2 of those timberclads actually engage at Fort Knox as well by the 14th. So major action here, and to me this is the bigger stroke than Fort Knox, and you know, it has major ramifications, particularly in terms of transportation and those railroads and logistics and all of that. Now,
It's going to shape the course of the war for at least the next 6 months.
oh, absolutely, and probably longer than
What happens
that.
if they burn the bridge at Florence?
Johnston can't get across, of course, but they did not burn it.
Shouldn't they have? I mean,
Well, that's debatable. Here again, you get into Johnston falling back, and he first falls back to Shelby, for Murfreesboro, and then to Shelbyville, which gets into your Tullahoma stuff, which if he's coming to the Mississippi Valley, that's a little off course. But a couple of things there. Number one, he wants to make them think he's heading to Chattanooga and East Tennessee. So that they'll kind of get, you know, leave this area here. But also too, if they do make it to Florence, and you know, transports can go anywhere gunboats can, and transports carry soldiers, and if the Union Army suddenly pops out at Florence or something, we better have a better place to cross, and that would be Stevenson on farther up the Tennessee River. That would be safer because the gunboats and transports can't reach there because of the shoals at Muscle Shoals. So that's as far as the Federal Navy can go at this point, and so Johnston will be safer there. So he ends up coming to Decatur though, because they don't destroy the bridge. They think, you know, what it's only going to hamper, you know, economics and so on, and we may need this bridge later. So they don't destroy it then. Johnston later does cross the railroad bridge at Florence, not at Florence, at Decatur, and will actually plank the railroad bridge so his troops can march across. And the idea was that we're going to plank in between the rails so the troops can march over and the wagons can go across, but still the trains can go across. But the wagons were too wide and they had to plank the whole thing over, or either just let the trains run. And so they loaded all the wagons and artillery and all that on railroad cars, which was a lot slower, but brought them across like that. So it's a little bit of a complicated movement there. So.
how far further upriver is Stevenson from Florence?
That's more in your territory.
By
What?
river?
No, by Johnson.
By rail.
50 miles?
More
So
like
it's not
90.
that- so
90,
it's not decisive.
Yeah.
It's not a end all be all. It's not a you know,
I mean,
deal
there are-
breaker.
There are
but-
still ways to work around, but the Deep South rail infrastructure is a mess.
even by this point.
Yeah, to go from, if you don't have the Mobile in Ohio, you have to go all the way to the Gulf Coast. You have to take the trains through Atlanta and then south to Mobile, cross the Gulf on ferries, reload, and then back up towards the Meridian and up into Mississippi. It's a nightmare, and it's the strategic nightmare that the other Johnson, Joe Johnston, will deal with in 1863 and 1864.
So let me see if I understand. In other words, the decisive move would have been somehow to get on the bridge at Decatur, the one that's south of the Tennessee. Am I missing my geography?
But that's on the other side of the shoals.
No. I'm talking about, they talk about them coming back down river. If they'd gone off to the left as they're coming down, there's this little thing that they possibly could have reached. There's a bridge going across a stream.
Yeah, they certainly could have broken the Memphis and Charleston at Decatur.
Right. Yeah.
But
At where?
at Decatur.
It is Decatur.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The easier thing to do, and this is really what Phelps misses, that he has the opportunity to really put the Confederates in a world hurt at this point, is the Bear Creek Bridge, just across the Alabama line between Iuka and Tuscumbia is Bear Creek, and that's a long, and even today if you go across on Highway 72, it's a long bottom and it's backwater, you know, flooded back in there, and that railroad bridge is long and vulnerable, and the gunboats really could have could have reached that, and that scares the Confederate High Command. Everybody's talking about we got to save the Bear Creek Bridge because it is more vulnerable than the Decatur Bridge, and so it really doesn't matter where you break the Memphis-Charleston line, as long as you break it. And it could have been done at Decatur, but it could have easier been done at Bear Creek, which it does. It's not done there either. So the next best intention is to do it at Corinth, and that's why the focus becomes Pittsburgh Landing, Corinth, ultimately Shiloh.
But what you talk about Danville being such a decisive move, right? Breaking it there. So if they go further down and break it at Bear Creek, they really have put Johnston on that.
Oh yeah, well, you've broken at Danville the first tier of Confederate rail capability along the first line of defense. Then the Memphis and Charleston, you break the second tier, and then you have to go back to what Dave was talking about, to the next tier down, which is not complete at this point. There's this section between Demopolis and Selma that is not completed, so that's why you have to go down to Mobile and back up through Montgomery and Atlanta. So
I guess what puzzles by, although hindsight is always 20/20, is that if they're so alert to the notion of breaking the Danville line, why do they not think, how about if we really get aggressive once we're there and then push even further and try and break that one?
Because it would take a federal army to do it.
Do it just with the gunboats.
No, the gunboats are stopped at Muscle Shoals, which is this side of Decatur. Now they could have done it at Bear Creek again, but they missed the opportunity.
That's what I'm saying, Bear Creek.
Yeah. They Phelps just he drops the ball there, and they realize this later.
Deep in enemy territory and out of communication with his own forces.
Yeah, you
and
are.
He would have to stop and spend some time.
Right, and he's on a raid. He's not on a destructive mission at this point. It's the first time anybody's been down in that area. So it was probably taking an army to do this. And bear in mind, after Fort Henry, and particularly after Fort Donelson, Grant is under a cloud, and Halleck is saying, all right, buddy, I'm going to teach you a lesson. And you've got all the political problems in the Union High Command, and they kind of dropped the ball then, and it's a little bit of a delay even moving down to Pittsburgh Landing for the operation against Corinth.
Wouldn't you say Halleck is almost as discombobulated by the fall of Henry and Donelson as Johnston is?
Oh, he's frightened by it. He's
Suddenly he's way out over. He's operating without a net. He's out of his comfort zone.
Well, and the main guy at the front is
a guy he doesn't trust.
And not worried about what goes on, And that's why he pulls the reins back a little bit and says, all right, we got to get a hold of this, and we got to start doing things by the book. Grant, you're not operating by the book. I wrote the book, so you got to do it my way. And
that's where all that Grant exceeds his orders and goes off to Nashville. I mean, there's a period of like 3 or 4 days where you read Halleck's message traffic and you feel he's crapping his pants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Freaked out by
McClellan's giving him, a permission to arrest Grant and replace him. Halleck saying that the army's more demoralized by victory at Donelson than McDowell was at Bull Run. I mean, it's just insane.
And
the only one who's demoralized is Halleck.
Yeah.
It starts right here at Fort Henry. Because when Grant sends the message back, Fort Henry is ours, we won, and we captured Fort Henry and Tillman and all that kind of stuff, and what does he tack on at the end? Oh, by the way, tomorrow I'm going to march over to Fort Donelson
I'll
and get
take
it.
Donelson in about 2 days.
And Halleck reads that, and he's like, what? Wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this kind of thing.
Halleck wants to be methodical and careful.
The book.
And yet he somehow misses that he keeps telling Grant to destroy the bridge at Clarksville, which Grant can't get to without going through Donelson.
Through Donelson, yeah. He's worried about the bridge at Clarksville, which is the same rail line that they just broke at Danville, which they've got the job done, and he's still, worried about elsewhere.
I find Halleck's whole reaction very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and
I understand perfect is the enemy of good, but let's say that Halleck is really a genius. Does he have the resources at this point to actually break the Bear Creek Bridge if that's what he decides to do?
Yeah, Phelps could have done it. Yes, absolutely. He could. I mean, you sail up to it and shoot some cannons at the piers and so on.
Well, so there is that potential.
Oh yes, and the Confederates know that, and they are scared out of their wits about it.
And Florence doesn't have the same impact as Bear Creek would have.
Either would have been equal because you break the line. Well, no, Florence is not on the Memphis and Charleston. Decatur. We're getting Florence and Decatur back and forth. Decatur would have been the
I
same
understand what you're saying, but
as Bear Creek. Florence
So-
is a spur line.
So he's right at Florence, and he agrees, well, we're not gonna burn your bridge because we wanna be your pal.
Right.
Right, so he lets that go, but that isn't the decisive move. The decisive move would have been Bear Creek.
No, the Florence Bridge is a spur line off the Memphis and Charleston, so it would not have broken the main trunk line.
Okay.
The Decatur Bridge would have, which he cannot get to.
I got it.
Yeah,
But
we're-
he
we're-
could've gotten to Bear Creek, and that would have been decisive.
That would have been decisive, yeah. And
Oh, go ahead.
that's what they keep trying to do when Sherman lands in mid-March at Eastport. Tyler's Landing, they're going after the Memphis and Charleston, try to break it. It's what Lew Wallace is trying to do at Crump's Landing, break the Mobile and Ohio. So they're after these railroads, and my feeling is Phelps just drops the ball. He had the opportunity to do it, and just didn't.
And he has no infantry with him. It's just the crews
Right.
of the gunmen.
Well,
and he's isolated. But,
There are
yeah.
like a company or two assigned to, like the 32nd Illinois.
Okay.
A company or two of
Okay.
32nd Illinois is assigned to each boat.
Okay.
But it's not a major force thing.
But one of Halleck's reactions, on a positive note, is to push more forces in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we at least give him a little credit for that. But I agree, he's just going nuts.
It's a little longer.
Yeah.
But
It's
he
his
starts-
plan. It's
yeah.
accomplishing what he wants. It's just moving too fast
Too fast.
for
Yeah.
him to feel comfortable.
Because he hasn't, he may have written the book, but he hasn't
Well,
fast forwarded to like page 92
Yeah.
at that particular moment and said, okay,
Well,
now I'm here.
he's an engineer from an engineering school,
Right.
and while they think they understand Napoleonic warfare, they don't have
They
a
don't.
clue.
It's kind of like what he did going from Shallow to Corinth. Took forever.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
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 That's,
But
Move up
even
methodically,
that's an
carefully,
engineering feat.
Never give the enemy an opportunity.
Even moving reinforcements in, though, I think is as much him saying we got to help Grant so he don't get beat.
Right.
As
Yeah.
much as it is.
It's not reinforcing
you know,
the success.
it's
It's preventative measure.
preventative to
Yeah.
another to some type of defeat. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one about Tillman. So
Okay.
what? It gets to be February 6th. What options now does Mr. Tillman have? Which they seem to be far few and none. But
Not many. In hindsight, he's going to lose the fort anyway, so he could just as well have gone with Heiman back to Fort Donelson. Remember, he is in command of both forts.
Yep.
I mean, he's the only general officer here, and he's gonna lose the fort either way. But he fights it out. It's one of those kind of honor things, and also to buy time for Heiman to get out of
To
here.
get out.
It takes a while to get back, because obviously they're dealing with the same roads that McClernand's dealing with. And so he fights it out, and he and like 75 or 80 or so men surrender. Now, you will give Tillman a little bit of credit that I fought a lot of Confederate general officers with, that in losing the place, which they lose a whole lot of places, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, Island Number 10, Arkansas Post, Vicksburg, most of these Confederate officers lose the army in the process of losing the place.
Yeah.
And only a couple of Confederate general officers are smart enough to get the army out and not lose the army in the process of losing the place. And Tillman, although we're talking about very minuscule numbers here, it's only a couple of thousand, 2,500 or so, he nevertheless doesn't lose those troops in the losing game of losing the place. The others Beauregard at Corinth. Beauregard's smart enough to know, got to get the army out here. We're going to lose Corinth either way, so we don't lose the army losing the place. John Pemberton, the 2.5 Stooges at Fort Donelson, Mackle at Island Number 10. Others don't learn that lesson, and they lose the army, losing the place. So Tillman, I think there's a little bit of honor here. I'm gonna fight it out, and I know these guys. I know Grant and all that kind of stuff, and so we're gonna fight it out.
But from his command level, he really should have said, artillerists, I need you to hold off for an hour or two. He really should have been coming back with the column. From a command level.
Command level, yeah, but even perhaps taking his artillerists with him. I mean, what could they have done at Fort Donelson? Too.
Pseudo trained.
But he is, it's a fine line, I guess. But he deprives the Confederacy of the only general officer here, And of course, we're getting into your territory here of now all of a sudden with Tillman's surrender, there is no general officer to command these. So
he didn't have to surrender.
no,
He could have spiked the guns
And
at
got
the last
out.
minute
Sure.
and left.
Yeah.
And it would. How
It's
many,
that honor thing.
How many sailors can chase him?
not many.
Oh yeah.
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 Right. And the Federal Army is still a fair amount of ways away.
Right.
But does he have that? Does he have that intel about where McLaren is at this point?
He's
don't
got
know.
scouts out watching. Yeah.
But does he have the information back to him?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
He's getting
Okay.
reports.
So
But
not a Joe Wheeler thing. So that's
Yeah.
good.
It strikes me that the whole formal surrender thing was kind of pointless. There's
Well, it's that honor thing, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 19th century here, but it leaves a gap, and Johnston immediately sends the only other general officer in the area that he can to take over now Fort Donelson, because there is no Fort Henry in our possession. And he arrives on the 7th, and that's none other than who?
Bushrod.
Bushrod Johnson, who is
Johnson.
very soon eclipsed, of course, by Gideon Pillow, who arrives, and then Buckner arrives, and then Floyd arrives and takes command, and that it all goes downhill from there. Let's head back.